You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And obviously, once again, we're not live. But as we said, I think we actually mentioned that on Friday. So in our defense, I think we did on Friday's show say that there was a chance we wouldn't be live. I don't know. It was, we go on so late on Friday. Sometimes I don't really remember what we talked about. It was some of the stuff falls through the cracks, especially when it gets to be like midnight or something, and you're just kind of, it all blurs. But either way, Daryl had a work thing going. So I'm probably chatting with you guys, actually. And maybe you are too. I don't know. But during this thing, I'm probably going to have the chance to chat with you guys because obviously this has been premiered on YouTube. So, I didn't really want to do it by myself. It is called Head to Head, not just Head. So I might actually get more clicks.
Yes. Well, we have to be on a different platform. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, there'd be, might be a few YouTube violations if we did that. But either way, we're here on a Monday night with you guys. It's funny because a couple of people actually left in the comments that they like the pre-recorded episodes because we can get full thoughts out and it's not broken up by the discussion and all that stuff. So for anybody that's really into the pre-recorded stuff, you're going to like tonight's episode. And tonight, we ran across this not too long ago. We were talking about Cad Bane actually Friday. And, a lot of the things that pertain to him. And that just, of course, got us talking off air. And we started going, you know what? Let's talk about whether or not Cad Bane should get his own series. There is precedence for this. We had the Book of Boba Fett. We have the Mandalorian. I mean, technically, you could say that's somewhat of a similar character. And of course, Cad Bane did make his live appearance in the Book of Boba Fett. So we have had a live action Cad Bane so far. So I don't know, if you had to actually make a case for Cad Bane getting his own series, what would you basically say? Because, this is something that we talk about a lot. Like, everybody goes, oh, somebody should... But a lot of times when people say these things, they never really are able to articulate why. They just say, wouldn't it be cool if? So if somebody came up to you and said, look, I think Cad Bane should get his own series, or if somebody came up to you and said, who would actually be good to get a Star Wars series? And you said Cad Bane, what would be your reason for that?
I think Cad Bane is one of the more interesting characters in the new canon of Star Wars for the most part. We primarily saw him in the Clone Wars, and then of course we saw him pop up in other entities as well. But primarily, in the Clone Wars, he's a very cool character. Number one, the name just sounds cool, Cad Bane.
I know it does.
The name itself is cool. Then if you look at his attire, he's got this wide brim hat. He's kind of like the Lone Ranger gunslinger type guy. He has a lot of different accoutrements on his body that allow him to be one of the better prolific bounty hunters. When we talk about bounty hunters, of course, everyone talks about Bosk. Everyone talks about Aurora. We talk about Boba Fett, Jango Fett, and many others. And now we can add Din to the mix as well. But Cad Bane was very unique. And what made him really unique is that he was very good at dispatching Jedi. He often went up against them and he was actually quite formidable. And with him not actually having the use of the Force on his side to combat against the Jedi, that made it even more impressive. It's almost kind of like if you made Han Solo like a bad guy in a way, and you kind of got Cad Bane, because Cad kind of has his own swagger, much like Han Solo. He's just on that more, nefarious side. He's a very cunning kind of guy. He's very good at his job, and like I said, he goes up against Jedi frequently, and he's actually killed quite a number of them. So I think if you did a Cad Bane series, it would be cool to actually have him go up against Jedi, not the ones that we're familiar with, like an Anakin or Obi Wan, but you could have other, random Jedi that he comes across while he's on his missions, doing things. Um, he's super cunning. They've told some great stories with him in the Clone Wars, where the whole double cross thing. They had this whole what was this guy named Aradia Evolve or something like that. Um, well, that he kind of created this whole game called the Box, and
Oh, I
this
vaguely
whole
remember
thing,
that.
and it was basically like Obi-Wan Kenobi was kind of disguised as this bounty hunter,
Yeah, I
and
remember that
they were
whole
trying to
story
Dooku
arc.
was trying to yeah, Dooku, their whole plan was to kidnap Palpatine, and so
Yep.
they need like the best of the best, and so he put these bounty hunters to the test to see if they could make it out of this basically elaborate death trap game, almost like a jigsaw type thing, where they had to go through these different levels because they wanted to test them to see how good are you really, if you're in these vicarious situations, how would you get out of them? And in Cad Bane, of course, ended up being one of those guys. He's a master strategist, um, ruthless a lot of times. Um, he has some cool gadgets on him too. You see these gauntlets that he wears, like these electro gauntlets. He has like rocket boots, pretty much almost like Iron Man, which allows him to take flight. He's a great marksman. And what I didn't know, I never knew this before until I read the article, but these two tubes that you see attached to him, like those were actually put in because that was to combat him going up against Jedi from force choking him.
Oh, that's
Like if you
interesting.
force, so if you try to force choke him, he can still breathe with these tubes. So I think that's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying. Like just the fact that he thinks of these types of things, the fact that he's so prepared, the fact that he's so wily as a villain bounty hunter. Um, I think that just makes for interesting television.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of really cool bounty hunters. I mean, for one thing that I really like about him, you could say this about Bosk too, but he's one of the few truly alien bounty hunters that exist in this. I mean, not in the entire, but I'm talking about like what we've seen as far as depicted on film or anything like that, because there's a similarity in a way between him and the pirate Hondo. Um,
Hmm.
they're in
Very much
both.
so.
Actually, I think both of them would benefit from having either their own series or be prominently featured in a series. And I think that in Cad Bane's case, like you said, he's had a colorful history. I mean, there was one point where, I ended up brushing up on some of I didn't do any of the legends. I didn't read any of the legend stuff that dealt with him, but the actual canon stuff, he ran a contract on Darth Maul at one point. So, he wasn't really afraid of anybody. It's kind of
Hmm.
like, okay, if this is the person that you want, I'm going to go after them. I'm going to take the precautions necessary, like you said, like with the tubes. And
Hmm.
that's it. I'm just going to go after them. And he's very matter of fact about everything too. He doesn't get really emotional about it. I mean, to him, it's just a job.
No, it's just
And
a
so,
job.
yeah. And so more than anything, I think that in a lot of ways, even more so than Din. I mean, you could almost run a similar series with him. In fact, if they wanted to make the Mandalorian more of an anthology series, so let's say we're following Din for a while, and then, that ends up running its course or whatever, you can obviously feature other Mandalorians and then they can become the Mandalorian. People have theorized about that anyway. People have said that maybe Bo-Katan's going to take over, or some of the other Mandalorians that were featured in that series, they might become the Mandalorian or whatever. It's not necessarily always going to be Din, but you can expand beyond that. Maybe what you do is you create something that's very much in the same vein, but maybe you do something kind of in the style that book Tales from the Bounty Hunter or Tales of the Bounty Hunter, and you feature different bounty hunters in their own series, and maybe it might be a story arc here and there. Maybe you do Cad Bane for 3 episodes, Bosk for 3 episodes, that kind of thing. Or maybe you go by season. Okay, this season we're going to follow Cad Bane. This season we're going to follow Bosk. Maybe, well, Aura Singh was technically killed by Beckett, we found out, in Solo. But Cad certainly ran with her for a while. And in fact, one of the things that I think is also interesting about him is the fact that he's one of the few guys, other than maybe a Bosk or a Boba Fett, he's one of the few that actually spans across the trilogies in a way. He was obviously active during the prequels. He was active during the reign of the Galactic Empire. He's active after the fall of the Galactic Empire. So he really covers multiple timelines. And so therefore, you could actually frame a series in a lot of different ways. If you wanted to maybe not do an anthology type series, but maybe you do an actual Cad Bane, that's what it's called. Or maybe it's the Book of Cad Bane, right? Maybe that's how you do your bounty hunters, the Book of Bosk, the book, whatever. Okay, maybe you go into a little bit of a prequel of Cad, like what we did with Boba Fett, where we picked up at a certain point, and then you continue his story, and you could tell his story in the different timelines if you wanted to. Like maybe season 1 is during the prequel era, season 2 might be during the, like the original trilogy, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could do it, and an argument can be made for all of them. But the point is, you have somebody who's compelling enough, who can keep your interest. He, like you said, he has a really cool look. He has a cool backstory. He has, he's interacted with a lot of other characters that we love. He doesn't really exist in his own bubble. And so you can bring him in and out as you want. And that's another thing. Because honestly, I think the title of the show obviously is, should Cad Bane get his own series? But you could frame that differently. Instead of a yes or no, as far as like we either have him in a series or we just don't see him at all. The other question could be, should he get his own series? Or much like what we saw in the Book of Boba Fett, should he just be a prominent character that comes in and out of other series? There's always that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, characters. You could. There's a comic book series out that you were reading, right, Eric, about the bounty War of the Bounty Hunters.
War of the Bounty Hunters. Yeah, he wasn't really featured in that, though.
No, Cad wasn't featured, but what I'm saying is like you could feature a whole thing on bounty hunters. See, here's the thing with Star Wars, though,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
This is where I'm going with it is. So far we've always looked at Star Wars, for the most part as, light side, dark side, Jedi, Sith, and so when you have that, it's like, okay, but there's this whole other world. And this is what George Lucas himself even wanted to do. He wanted to highlight the underworld of Coruscant. He wanted to highlight, all the different types of stuff, because you have like drug dealers, you have pirates, you have gangsters like the Hutts.
Oh yeah, what was that series called? It was something 1313, I think.
Yeah,
Coruscant 1313 or something like that.
Yeah, something to that effect.
I'm gonna look it up.
You have all these different I guess groups or factions that you could kind of really focus on that could be their own thing. We got a little bit of that in Solo, where you're seeing like, okay, Solo kind of became a part of this whole, pirate slash, heist, movie. So you could have something like that. And then, of course the critical acclaim of the Mandalorian, okay, bounty hunters are cool now too, because and it's a little bit more grounded in reality. Now you don't have a whole bunch of force powers leading things. You're dealing with people who just, all right, how's this action? Now it's just almost like a traditional action movie. Like it's almost like, your bounty hunters become almost a John Wick or, and it's like, okay, well, how are they going to get out of this situation?
By the way, it was just called Star Wars Underworld. The 1313 thing, that was a video game. that I was thinking of.
Mm,
But
okay.
the unproduced live action series that was supposed to premiere after the Clone Wars, and he had written like 100 episodes or whatever, that was just called Star Wars Underworld. But yeah,
Okay.
if you look at it, just that scene from Solo: A Star Wars Story when they did that whole like train heist thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could just do a series like that, because that's basically Beckett was. Beckett and his
Mm-hmm.
little rogue group or
Mirror
whatever.
band. Yeah.
Yeah, they were going up against the Pike, or they were going up against Infus Nest, or all this other. I mean, you could just do like a Star Wars action series where you're not necessarily dealing with a lot of the deep lore of it. You're not worried about, because that's one of the downfalls of the Jedi Sith thing, is that now you start to get into a lot of the minutia. Well, who did this person train under? Why is this person, you know, I mean,
Powerful and
yeah, I mean, exactly.
yeah.
And then you start comparing that stuff. But you could literally do almost like a Star Wars Western type of a deal, or a Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
action film. Kind of like you said, you could either go the way of John Wick, or like the Bourne Identity, or, something like that. Or
Mm-hmm.
you can spin it to be a little bit more of, you can incorporate maybe some of the politics of it, and you could do more of a Mission Impossible style thing. You could do the typical heist movies like an Ocean's 11, or, the Italian Job or something. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can spin that, or you could just do like classic Western type things. You can, where maybe you have some sort of like a land dispute, and you got people who are defending. I mean, there's a lot of different plot points that you could do, and because the bounty hunters lend themselves to these various type of storytelling, you could just pick something, or you could do all of it. So the question then becomes, if we're dealing with Cad Bane getting his own series, now it's kind of like, well, what genre do you put it in? How do you do it? Do you go by season? Do you just, I mean, this is,
Well, Cad Bane, looking at him, I mean, you could put that really just as no different than you would the Mandalorian, honestly. You could put that more in as a because he can almost be like an anti-hero if you really think about it. Because that's the thing about a bounty hunter, is that because the bounty hunter is really is about the job, is that's all it's really. So on one hand, it's like, if I'm hiring you to do a job, to be about like, okay, go retrieve this person, or I need this back. Okay, to that person, they're a hero. But to the other
mm-hmm.
person who has the possession or whatever, depending on what it is, it's like, okay, well, they look at you as the villain. So this depends on which perspective you're looking at. I
Yes.
mean, it's all the same. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing too that you got to look at.
Mhm.
You mentioned the Mandalorian. One of the things that I thought, again, I don't dislike it. The Mandalorian's one of my favorite shows, really. But one of the problems that they had was they didn't really give us what they promised, if you think about it, because we were promised, okay, this is a Mandalorian that we're going to meet. It's not Boba Fett. 'Cause remember, everybody thought it was Boba Fett at
Mhm.
first. Okay, so it's
Right.
this new Mandalorian guy. He's kind of like, and they promise it's going to be kind of like like a Western gunslinger, lone sheriff in town or whatever. He's going to go from like system to system, take on jobs, clean up stuff or whatever. Almost like Kung Fu. Remember that series? It's going
Oh
to be
yeah.
very, very similar to that. But here's the problem. They brought in the Jedi again.
Mhm.
Now it's kind of like you had Grogu, and now it's like, okay, well, what's his deal? And now, oh, we're trying to, get midi-chlorians or something, and now Ahsoka's coming in, and then, and then Thrawn, of course, was mentioned, and so now it's part of this bigger thing. It wasn't what we were promised, and what I think is important about the point you're making is, with somebody like Cad Bane, they can now give us what was promised.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it all depends on where you want to set the story. Now, if you want to set it around the Clone Wars time, at the height of the Jedi, because primarily that's where we kind of, became acquainted with, Cad Bane. That's fine, because still, once again, but you don't have to have Obi-Wan, Anakin, Yoda. You don't have to have
No,
those
I liked your
characters in it.
idea. Your whole thing where it was kind of like, no, you just like hunting, Or maybe he runs into random Jedi or something. Or like you said, he takes like a contract out on some Jedi Knight or something that might be powerful. They don't necessarily have to be a Padawan or something, but like a
Right. Exactly.
something like that.
Like a Cypher or something like that,
Yeah, or I mean, even like a Quinlan Voss or something. I mean,
hmm
not necessarily those people, but somebody who is
To that
comparable
stature.
to that. Yeah, and you could do
Right.
something like that. And again, I think as long as you're keeping it more of an adventure style thing, and you're not trying to get too deep into the lore. So in other words, it's not focused on the fact that it's a Jedi or whatever. It's like, okay, it's a Jedi on a mission. Cad Bane's going in there to stop him, capture, kill, whatever, and that's it. And the other nice thing about doing something like that is you can make it more episodic. It doesn't have to
Yeah,
be,
absolutely.
one of these like season-long story arcs like a lot of the other stuff is. It could be very
hmm
much like
The
Strange
adventure of
New
the week.
Worlds. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like, okay, well, what's the adventure this week? Oh, okay.
right.
Cat's got to go here. And, it's almost
Yes.
like a Charlie's Angels or something like that, where it's like, okay, he gets his, you know, somebody needs, or the A team. That's kind of what the Bad Batch became. If you really
Yeah.
think about it, like the Bad
Yeah.
Batch is nothing but like a space version of the A team.
Well, here's a nice thing about that, though, bringing up the Bad Batch. So this is like a lot of, I mean, even sitcoms like a Frasier or some of the older sitcoms or something. You might actually have story elements, basically, that run through seasons. Because, obviously you're following, I mean, life isn't like a beginning and end, and then the next begin. I mean, there are threads that run through, but the point is you're not focused on them. It's like you said, it's the adventure of the week. It's like what the Bad Batch has become, what a lot of these shows like the A-Team, that's a good example, or even a lot of these procedural shows, like a Law and
hmm
Order, CSI, or something like that, right? It's the case of the week. Now, obviously, there were things in their personal lives and stuff like that they would deal. Like I remember in I think it was like Law and Order SVU. They had this one detective who had like an alcohol problem, and she was like kind of masking it and stuff like that. And that sort
hmm
of ran because usually what they'll do is they'll do that by season. They'll have like a season long story arc with one or more characters where it's not necessarily the focus, but it's kind of like a subplot that sort of runs through that season. So in this case, she was battling alcoholism and it was affecting the case. And finally, it came to a head, but it wasn't something that was focused. She might sneak off to take a drink or something and they play the depressing music, then go to a commercial and then it's back to the case. But the point is, the actual plot of the episode was here's a case. The case is resolved. Next week we're doing another case. And they could do that, like you said, with this kind of a thing where you just get an episode of the week. Like it doesn't have to be some season long or maybe 3 episode long story arc. It could just, and that's why I brought up Star Trek Strange New Worlds, because that was something that they consciously started to produce because you had Discovery, you had all these other newer Star Trek series. And it's like, let's get it back to like the original series and maybe the Next Generation, where it was
hmm
just here's the challenge of the week or whatever. Let's make it episodic. And they did that. And it's been successful. And they could easily do that with this or honestly, a lot of different Star Wars series. It's just that, I don't know. Do you think that which one do you think people prefer though?
I mean, I think it just all depends on the character. I think I believe that whatever the story or the character serves, that's what it should be. And I think the fans have no problem with it. So like if you have something like everything doesn't need to be like a Game of Thrones where you have
Right.
each episode or each season is building up to some
Mm-hmm.
big grandiose thing.
Mm-hmm.
Cause okay, when you're dealing with, the Game of Thrones and you're talking about the whole kingdom or whatever, like okay, that makes sense. You have to show the progression of and how everybody's trying to fight for this crown to be, king or whatever the case may be. For something like this, though, like a bounty hunter, like it's more cut out for episodic television, in my opinion. He runs into these different
Yeah, it's a job to
cases or
job thing.
situation.
Yeah.
It's a job to job thing, and it's just like, all right, here's my, and this may be a tough job. So like, okay, you might have arcs. Like, okay, let's say you have 12 episodes in a Cad Bane series. Okay, maybe 3 of them may be like, an arc or something like that. And then it's like, okay, but then it goes back to being traditionally episodic. I think that would be fine, because I think everything doesn't have to have this whole we're leading up to something, you know? So, and especially for a character like Cad Bane, he doesn't really warrant that. Like, people don't, like, now you have to almost like create something for him
Exactly.
to do like that. You know what I mean? Where,
or he'd have to be part of somebody else's thing.
Right. Where it's just kind of like, that's not, just, we want to see Cad, we just want to see Cad Bane, be ruthless, be slick, be, himself, because that's why we tuned in, because we want him to be the same Cad Bane we saw in the Clone Wars.
Well, I'm going to go a step further than that. I honestly would like to go back to, and again, I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe the part of it's an age thing, but you remember back in the day when television series, if they did a continuation, it was basically a 2-parter. I mean, very rarely did television go to a 3-parter.
Mm-hmm.
It was usually like you would have, the episode, and maybe occasionally, if it was a bigger story, it might go over 2 episodes. And I would almost like to see it go back to that, because that was one of the weaknesses, actually, I think, of the Clone Wars. I mean, you and I talk about this all the time. You remember that? It must have been like 5 episodes where they did that old stupid droids were stranded thing.
Yeah, that was
and it was like, I mean, and if it wasn't 5, it felt like that. But I know it was at least 3. Because the problem with that was, you could get away with doing something like that if, like Cobra Kai, you just, boom, you release all the episodes at once. Okay, I can handle that. The problem with the Clone Wars is, you have, and this, again, was another one of those, season-long story arcs. Every season's building up to something, and it makes it worse, because what you would have is, I'm watching a bunch of droids stuck on a desert planet or something trying to get home. Okay, the episode's over. Now I gotta wait another week for the next episode, when there's like a real story, like what's Palpatine doing? What's Anakin and Obi-Wan doing? What's going on in the bigger universe, when they would have these like really meaty, you'd have like Obi-Wan and Satine and all this, like, Maul is taking over Mandalore. I mean, you'd have like these really giant, storylines, and now I'm blowing a week. Okay, fine, whatever. It's a filler episode. I go the next week, it's another one where they're, okay, now we're further along, and then the next week, oh, look, we got a ship. It's like, you guys are like blowing like 3 weeks on some nothing story that makes no sense. Well, that was the problem I had.
It's not even the fact that it doesn't make sense. We just don't care.
Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense. No, the episode makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense on why they're even putting this in there.
Oh, okay. I
see what I'm saying? It's like, why are you putting this in there? Now, by contrast, I don't think it was the Clone Wars, it was Rebels. Remember there was that one, kind of slow talking, like Death Star type droid that they ran into? He was kind of like an evil guy, and I think he ended up being on their side or something. I used to call him the Patrick droid, because he kind of reminded me the way he talked to Patrick. Yeah. And it was, that made more sense, because even though they spent a couple episodes dealing with that droid, he was part, actually, of the bigger story. So, that was different, because you have a situation here where you don't know right now why this is fitting in, but this is actually a very key thing. Instead of a filler episode, I would call that more a bridge episode. So in and of itself, it's meaningless, but what it's doing is it's bridging one major plot point to the next major plot point. So that's what separates it a little bit. but that droid stuck on the and it had no bearing at all on the series. Now, if it had been more of an episodic type of a thing, I still wouldn't have been crazy about it, but at least you wouldn't be, wanting to shoot yourself because you have to wait weeks. Whereas if they had just dropped Clone Wars seasons, okay, here's all 22 episodes and you can binge
Mhm.
it, then you could get through this whole droid thing. And maybe you wouldn't hate it as much because you knew you were getting the entire season. But when you had to wait week to week, it was
Yeah.
frustrating. And I think in a lot of cases, even in a case like a Game of Thrones or, now House of the Dragon or, some of these
Mhm.
other shows, Star Trek Discovery, or, shows that are even outside of the sci-fi fantasy universe where you have to wait for this big payoff. I think people
Yeah.
just sort of want things that they can take in a bite size, you know.
Well, yeah, I think that's because that's the reason why a lot of people, I mean, when they watch series, sometimes sometimes you do get a series where it's all dropped off at once, and then sometimes you do have to wait week to week. But then,
Mhm.
like I said, it's usually something that's building to a climax or what have you. And that's the problem I have with, some of the Star Wars content that we're receiving on Disney Plus is because it's like, well, we just talked about with Ahsoka.
Yes, I was
You
about to
wait
bring
to
that up.
you wait to the last 2 episodes to now give us Thrawn and, this whole thing, and it's like, okay, but we had 3 other episodes, that just kinda just meandered along really, we didn't delve too much into
Right.
stuff.
And you have to
And so I
wait
think
on a weekly basis,
week a basis to
which I
figure out
think
like,
makes you
okay,
actually
what
more angry about it. And it
yeah, it
colors.
does.
That's why I want to go back and I actually want to just watch Ahsoka as a series because I want to see if it changes my mind about anything. Because if they had done that, if they had just dropped Ahsoka, like, okay, here you go, what was it, like 10 episodes or 8 episodes or something? It was 8.
8.
So
Mhm.
if they had just said, okay, boom, there's all 8 episodes, and you could just watch it, how many ever you want. I think a lot of the episodes, I mean, look, there were still issues with the show, and those wouldn't have changed. But I think they would have been minimized because some of the problems that we had are like, okay, you're taking it episode by episode, you're like putting it under a microscope and you're dissecting it. Whereas if you're watching it as part of the bigger story and you're actually watching this thing more like one big giant movie versus an episodic type of a thing, then that's better. Now I know they do that so everybody's on the same page because you want to get people talking. So a lot of times they'll take these what ends up being like a 10-part movie and then do 10 episodes, right? Because that way, okay, episodes 3 is there, next day at work or school or whatever, everybody's talking about episode 3. Everybody's on the same page. But my personal opinion, I'm interested to see what you think about this. My personal opinion is if it's a continuous storyline like that, then I think that they should just drop it all at once. If it's more of a true episodic thing, then I definitely think that they should then, maybe go week to week.
That's a hard one because on one hand, if you have something that's building up to like a climax, like most series usually do,
Hmm.
it kind of makes it better when you do week to week because you kind of build the community. It's
Yeah,
like, okay, we're all talking about it all at the same time and we all get the same information at the same time. And it's just like we all have the moment at the same time, and everyone's either cheering or like ravishingly mad because it didn't end the way that we hoped it would, it would be. Because then what happens is like now you have people spoiling it, you know.
hmm,
Whereas if it's episodic, it's like okay, it's like okay, it's whatever.
right. Which, I mean, I know that's a big problem. I mentioned Cobra Kai before. That's a big problem that people have with that is that you get people that start talking about it and it's like, wait, I haven't gotten there yet. And, you know, there is that. I mean, I get that. Um, I just think that it is something though that you do have to be careful about because again, we were talking about serving the story.
Right.
So maybe it's not a question of is it one continuous story or like it's building up to something or is it episodic? Maybe it's more of a question of which way does serve the story best. Or you could even look at it which way serves the fan base best.
Well, I think in most cases you have to look at this. What's the story? I mean, like I said, for somebody like Cad Bane, I think we can both agree that episodic would probably be better served for somebody like Cad Bane. Um, the whole Mandalorian thing was better as a traditional series because you had this whole thing of, all right, he inherits his kid and now he's trying to find, where to drop him off at. Like, okay, I'm trying to find your master or whatever the case may be. So it's like
Right, yeah.
there's a journey there.
Mm-hmm.
But because he's not your typical, well, he starts off as your typical bounty hunter. And because we don't know anything about Den, you can kind of create that. Cad Bane, that wouldn't work with Cad Bane because we all know who Cad Bane is, and that would be so out of character for him to try to, all right, I'm trying to find this kid's master. Like, that just wouldn't, it would just be stupid.
Like if you just basically plugged him into the story of the Mandalorian.
Yeah, well, you just swapped him out. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense. And that's what I'm saying. So like for someone like Cad Bane, he fits better in a episodic situation because it's like, all right, you can get right into it. It could still be an hour show, but it's like, all right, hey, he's got this task. Somebody's calling him up. It's almost like like the old gumshoe, like the detectives,
right,
private investigator type thing.
That'd be another.
Like,
he'd be perfect for that.
And that's what I'm saying. Like so it's like, okay, the case of the week. It's like, okay, I got, this lady comes into my office and asks me to go find some Tradosian whatever. So she drops the money on the table and I go out, So then he goes and it's like, all right, now he's encountering Hondo. He's encountering all these pirates that everyone's after this treasure but he's got to be the one to bring it back. It's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a perfect thing. Then like the next week, it's like, okay, I got this friend who was, incarcerated, but he has all this information that I need to make my thing work. Here, I'm paying you, 10 million credits to get him out. All right, cool. I'll take the job. Now he's got to go through all this imperial crap to try to get this guy, whatever the case may be. So I think that serves Cad Bane a lot better. If you were to do a Leia series, I think Leia would be more of a traditional series. I don't think she would work episodically. I think Leia will work more as because
she could.
Her character, I mean, you could, but I think her character is naturally progressive in the sense of like, okay, as she's becoming, she's growing in the rebellion or becoming, coming into her own as being princess or senator Organa, it's like, okay, now we're following her as she's developing into, that's more like your, a Law and Order type thing or some of your procedural type stuff. It's like, okay, let's see how Leia starts to grow and become a powerful voice in the Senate. Okay, that makes sense.
Well, here's the thing, and Leia could work either way, and that was good actually that you made the distinction between like more when you said her story is more progressive because actually I think that's where you could start differentiating characters, whether they lend itself because it's true. Look, you don't sit there and think to yourself, I want to do more of a Star Wars romance kind of thing. Cad Bane. I'm thinking he'd be the guy.
Right.
Like he would never. It's kind of like you said. There's certain characters that would lend themselves. If you were doing more of a genre type of a thing, there's certain characters that lend themselves more to that. And like you said, either say the Western or the film noir or the hard-boiled detective kind of thing. That's where Cad Bane. That's sort of his wheelhouse. Now with Leia, you could do a lot of different things too because you could make that. Like you said, where it's just, hey, I'm trying to maybe do a season by season story arc with her, because obviously that could work. But where you could do it episodically is you focus the time when she's like a senator is more like a teenager. I mean, was it Claudia Gray? I think she's the one that actually wrote some of those like early Leia books that came out not too long. I mean, it's not super recent, but it's not terribly it hasn't been a horribly long time. It was like Princess Leia, I think, was the first one, and they actually wrote a few of them. And
Like if you took the Bloodline storyline, like, and made that into like, that would be a great series.
It would be, but see, that one you would have to make into, because honestly, Bloodline could be a movie.
Well, yeah, true story.
Or if you do a series, and it had to be like a 10 episode, you're breaking it up. But what I'm talking about is
season,
right. Yeah, and you could do that. You could do multiple seasons. Like, okay, let's do 8 episode seasons. We're going to make it like maybe 3 seasons. So there's going to be like 24 episodes, and we're going to break this one big story up into 24 40-minute episodes. You could do something like that. What I'm talking about is you could take the Leia thing and make it episodic by focusing on her time in the Senate, and just, here's the problem of the week, or here's the challenge of the week, or the adventure of the week, or whatever it is, and do it that way. So she's one of those characters, actually, that you could spin that either way. You can make that more, like you said, of a long, drawn-out story arc thing, or you can maybe do an episode-by-episode thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that's what I'm saying. Like, going to somebody like Cad, it's just Cad Bane to me just fits more in an episodic form. I think he would be a great character because you can have him interact with all sorts of different types of life forms to expose people to what's out there, and then you can do spin-offs off of that. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, okay, we can do one on the Pikes, or we can do one on, like, if you want to do more of a drug cartel type thing, okay, almost like a Narcos type situation. Okay, boom, there you go. You got the Pikes. If you wanted to do,
See, something like the Pikes, though,
of,
the Pikes would almost have to be like, I don't know if you could focus a series on them, because
their type of organization. But if you wanted to do like Black Sun, or if you wanted to do,
even then, I think they would be more of a villain in another person's thing, unless, this is what I was thinking, let's just go with the Pikes, for example. Because, I mean, people are somewhat familiar with them now because of their appearance in the Book of Boba Fett, and they've been around the comics and all that stuff. If you actually created a main Pike character that you introduced, and you got to know him a little bit, no different than Din with the Mandalorians. Now, of course, we knew, Boba Fett and all that. So, I mean, maybe that's not the best example because we knew some of those guys. But if you just take a Pike who we only know is a group, right? The Pikes, and they function as a group. But if you actually take a single one and say, hey, I want to follow this person's story, okay.
It was almost like Bo-Katan, like Bo-Katan and
yeah, because now
Death
instead of the
Watch,
Mandalorians, it's like you're focusing on certain Mandalorians, and I mean, Sabine could even be counted in that too. But I'm just thinking, because the Pikes are not quite as, people are getting familiar with them, but people aren't like super crazy familiar with them.
They're not fleshed out like that.
Yeah, exactly. They're more fleshed out as a group. They're an antagonistic group that usually goes up against our heroes, no different than the Sand People and
or the Hutts,
or the Hutts. Even though there's Jabba and stuff like that. So I mean, we got to know. I'm talking about people that we never got to know individually, like the Jawas. We don't know of an individual Jawa. They're just the Jawas. Right. It's like, so if you were to, what you would have to do, like if you wanted to make a Jawa-centered movie, you'd have to create a character that we got to know, And they came very close to doing this actually in the Book of Boba Fett, because there were certain Sand People characters, like certain Tusken Raiders, that we identified like as individuals. And so now we look at them differently. So you could, I mean, it can be done, is what I'm saying, with what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I just think like, and what I mean by like a cartel type thing, like if you want to make it like a drug type thing, like okay, you're basically taking another character that has to contend with the Pikes. Is what I'm saying. Like the Pikes are the main villain, almost like a Thrawn. So if you have like no different than um when you had a Ahsoka and that girl that she was running around with at the beginning of Bad Batch, the last like um I'm sorry that no, it's the end of the Clone Wars. Either
Mm-hmm.
Clone Wars or the Bad Batch. But anyway, you take a character who's like, okay, look, I'm running from the Pikes because I owe them a bunch of money. I'm trying to figure out how to pay them. Almost like a Han Solo type thing. And then it's like now they kind of have to keep slipping the Pikes and going against the drug cartel or something like that. Like stuff like that you can do. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, in
Um,
fact, it's funny. I mean,
mhm,
that whole scene during The Force Awakens when Han Solo was going up against Concha Club, and he was
mhm.
going to, like, that whole little scene when the Rathtar, eventually got loose or whatever. What was funny about that was I'm watching that scene in The Force Awakens, and I'm going, there's another whole movie here. I mean, Han Solo and his smuggler days when he's, like post Return of the Jedi, when he's out running around as a smuggler again, running into all these colorful different gangs and all this other stuff. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, like, this one scene alone, I would rather see this than the rest of this film. Like, who cares
Right.
about Rey and her ridiculous, prodigious, you know, I just think, and suddenly I have all these powers. It's like, I mean, we saw her beginnings as a scavenger and like all that stuff. I'm sitting there like, you know what? I'm looking at this one scene with Han Solo and, these like competing gangs that are after him and everything. That to me was a more compelling story than what we actually got in The Force Awakens. But that just goes to show
Right.
you that you can expand this universe, not even necessarily with Han Solo and Chewbacca. I mean, it could have been, anybody. And I mean, another thing, I would have been okay. Now, of course, they killed him off, but if they wanted to go before Solo, I wouldn't mind seeing more Beckett movies with Woody Harrelson. I mean,
Hmm.
there's other things that they could do within this universe and create more compelling stories that I think would be really interesting, and that honestly I think would bring in fans, because a lot of times fans, even the hardcore ones, really start to complain about, the same old rehashed storylines that they're getting. And it's, you and I have talked about this all the time. Why are the books so much better? And the reason is because you have a lot of the books that do focus. And look, before anybody starts complaining, I get it that they're different medium, right? I mean, you can't, it's hard to compare books to films. And even when you adapt a book into a film, it becomes different just by virtue of being a film now, because it's a different
Hmm.
medium. And so when you're talking about something like the expanded universe, even if you were to make faithful adaptations of the expanded universe books, there would still be a distinction between the books and the films. As far as, I mean, even if they were, each one were high quality, it would still be different. It's just because it's a different storytelling type of a tool, right? So
Yeah.
I get that. I understand that.
You have to tell a story differently than in a book than you would a
Exactly.
film.
Right. You can't. So, okay. All of that, notwithstanding, when you just compare the stories, forget the medium. When you just compare the storylines, why is the expanded universe so much better? It's because they have their main thread, right? Thrawn is now the head of the Empire. And, obviously you had the Thrawn trilogy, and you had stuff where, there was, like, I think Outbound Flight. I think that book had Thrawn in it. Thrawn would pop up in some novels where it made sense. They never really did like a fan service type of a thing. It was always where it made sense. But then you had other books, and even when they featured the main characters, you had like the courtship of Princess Leia. It sounds like some young romance type of thing, and I had long dismissed it as that until I started reading all these reviews, and when you read it, it's incredible. And then they had this other book called I, Jedi, which featured none of the main characters and very few, if any, of the side characters. It was like a complete original Star Wars story. It was set in the Star Wars universe. It still felt like Star Wars, but it was completely unfamiliar characters. And so that's proof that with the expanded universe, you could tell this wide array of stories. But yet, under Disney, not so much in the books, because I actually think that they've done a really good job even in the new canon books. But when it comes to television and film, it's like they're really, just cocooning up, and they're trying to insulate themselves in the same comfortable storylines, and it's all because of something that Lucas, I should share this on our Discord. If I haven't already, I may have. If I haven't, I will. There was an interview that Lucas gave where it was almost like he was a prophet. He started going that if somebody else bought, this is before the whole Disney thing, if somebody else controlled Star Wars, it would become more about marketing, and then the stories would become more about what would sell versus what was, it was eerie what he was saying, because that's really the problem. Everybody goes, well, what's the problem with the Disney era? The problem is they're trying to gear everything to sell. They're trying to strike gold, They're not paying attention to what's a good storyline.
Well, it's no different than like we tell kids all the time. A lot of kids like, oh, okay, I want to get a job that pays a lot of money.
Right.
But it's like, or you could do a job that you really love to do, and because you do it so well, people will pay you money to keep doing it because you make such a good, product or service or what have you. And that's really the difference between Star Wars today versus yesteryear is you have, like George said, you have people just trying to, capitalize off what's already been built and just hoping that, that's enough. But in reality, it's like, it's missing a lot of the heart of what
Yes.
Star Wars actually is.
Yes.
And so that's why it's not landing the way. And that's when you have those books that's written, the Thrawn, the original Thrawn, the Heir to the Empire series, that's coming right off. That was what, the early 90s? That's
Yeah,
coming
91.
right off the heels. 91, something 91. Return of the Jedi was what, 83?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's not that far removed from the last Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
So
But you got to look at this, though.
You're still in that vein, though. That's what I'm saying. Like, you're still
you are
in
but
that moment. And
but here's the thing. Like, okay, so between when the Phantom Menace come out, 99, right?
99.
Yeah. Okay, so between 91 and 99, you had no Star Wars. So you're right. The earlier Star Wars stuff, you're not too far removed from the original trilogy. However, by the time you get to, like, I don't know, 96, 97, you're pretty far removed from it. That was kind of a weird, like, the mid-90s was kind of a weird time because as Star Wars fans, we figured this was it, man. There's never going to be another Star Wars film. It's just going to live in these books. And I think that that's the reason why the fan base got really, really rabid about their love for the expanded universe, because for a long time, for like a decade, it was pretty much ingrained that this was going to be it for Star Wars. Then he starts releasing movies, and you're like, oh, well, okay. Okay, well, after 2005, it's kind of the same thing again. Except the difference being that now Lucas was actually producing content himself. He was saying, oh, here's the Clone Wars. Here's a couple like games and stuff that maybe have a canon element to them. So we were getting a little bit, like post 99, we were getting a little bit more. But that sweet spot in between 91 and 99, everybody figured that was going to be it. And yet, yeah, sure, there was silly stuff, right? I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the every expanded universe book was amazing, because it wasn't. I mean, there was some wild misses even in the expanded universe. I'm not going to go revisionist history on you guys, but when you look at pretty much the core, the storytelling was incredible. And it maintained its quality pretty much through the whole thing.
Yeah, I think if Star Wars is going to continue and hopefully thrive, they have to look at some other characters that are fan favorites. Sorry, had a little MD moment.
I was gonna say, I think you need Viagra for your microphone there. It's going limp on you.
Yeah, a little MD. Microphone dysfunction.
Yeah, microphone disorder. This never happens. I swear, it's the first time.
Right.
Should Daryl get his own? Yeah.
But no, I think that when you look at characters like your Cad Banes and things like, there's so many other characters that people have loved, that could be great, compelling stories. You don't have to do the whole typical series thing. You can experiment with episodic, almost episodic television again. And I think that a lot of people are starting to respond well to more grounded Star Wars. That's why everybody loved Andor. That's why, I think a lot of people like Solo, even though it wasn't marketed well. Like when people actually went back and watched it, it was like, oh, this is actually good. So that's why everybody was clamoring for a Solo too, because, you didn't have any of the Jedi stuff. It was just simply, people, love Rogue One. Rogue One didn't have a whole lot of Jedi elements except for the few times you saw Vader. So, I think that people, if they really paying attention to the metrics on certain things, and I think if they really stopped and really looked, it's like, okay, there's a Star Wars out there for, you can bring in people into the casual fan who are casual fans into it and give them something that's digestible for them, which I think would be like the Mandalorian, a Cad Bane series, your Andors, your stuff like that. And then people who really love, the Force, the Jedi Sith type stuff. Okay, you still make content there as well. And I think if we do that, I think Star Wars would be in a great place. And then, some people might, of course, the hardcores are going to probably check out everything just because we're hardcore. And then you got the ones who, they stick to what they like. So all in all, I hope Cad Bane gets a series. I think he's probably one of the coolest characters in recent years that's been really developed and kind of fleshed out. And he looked great when we saw him in live action in Book of Boba Fett. I mean, it was like he literally jumped out of animation and walked into, your living room almost.
Yeah, in fact, I would dare say he might be the best depiction of an animated character in live action.
Yeah, because he even looked better than Thrawn,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think yeah, give the blue guy from Duro his own show.
Well,
I'm all about it.
Here's what's funny about what you're saying is the fact that, okay, now I'm a guy that loves the lore. I love the Jedi. I love the Sith. Like that, I really lean toward that. However, I love Solo. I love Rogue One. I love all that other stuff. I even brought up the fact that if you gave me something along the lines of that Han Solo scene in The Force Awakens between him and the rival gangs, I'd watch that. I mean, I think if the story is interesting and it's compelling enough, it doesn't necessarily have to have a bunch of lightsabers in it in order to capture your attention.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think something like Cad Bane, he would be a really good representation of that type of storytelling, because you were talking about how, okay, you have stuff that's really Jedi Sith heavy, and then you have other stuff like, say, an Andor or something like that, where it's the other extreme. And then, of course, you have stuff like The Mandalorian, which basically features a little bit of both. Because at its core, The Mandalorian is kind of like what we were proposing a Cad Bane series would be. It's an adventure of the week, right? It's the gunslinger that's going to a different system, and what adventures is he going to run into there? What job is he going to take? It's sort of like, the one thing that I loved about the earlier parts of The Mandalorian was it played very much like a RPG video game, where you had this main quest, but as you're going on the main quest, you start taking all these side quests, which sometimes actually lead you into the main one. And so that it worked out very well. And then, of course, when they started introducing the Force and some Jedi in there and stuff like that, it became a little bit more, I guess, familiar from the people watching the films. But it actually had elements of both. And with something like Cad Bane, you could just do a strictly, like what The Mandalorian would be without the Jedi and all that stuff, without the Force into play and everything else. Cad Bane could just be that gunslinger, or I don't know, I kind of like your idea where he's almost like a private detective kind of thing, like that hard-boiled detective, walking down the street, where you hear all the inner monologues,
Yeah.
I was on the trail of a train, that kind of thing, it's...
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, he's almost like the space version of Shaft in a way.
Yeah, kind of.
If you really,
Yep, or Mickey Splains, Mike Hammer, or, stuff
Yep.
like that, because he kind of has that whole stoic sort of vibe, or Chinatown with Jack Nicholson. That's a classic example of the hard-boiled detective kind of, that film noir kind of thing. So you could do something like that, and it could be, again, I've long thought that we should go into genre things. In fact, one of the ideas that we're playing with for next Monday's show, because it's going to be more of a Halloween theme kind of thing, because obviously it'll be the day before Halloween, is actually talking about, should Star Wars do a horror film finally? So that it's not confirmed yet, but that's pretty much what we're leaning into a week from tonight, which should be a live show. But if you started to go into the more genre type stuff, where you're just doing a pure genre type thing, so you're not mixing it, because if you think about it, Andor kind of does that. There's sort of that political thriller adventure kind of thing, and it pretty much sticks to that. But if they wanted to go in that direction, where they start exploring different genres and just narrowly focusing it, then the Cad Bane thing could definitely be something that you could use. And like you said, he's mysterious enough to be interesting, but he's familiar enough that I think people would tune in right away. Like, he's known enough. It's not like a Din situation where you didn't even know who this guy was. It's like, it kind of looks like Boba Fett, sort of, or maybe actually looked a little bit more like a gray version of Django. It's kind of like, all right, he's kind of got this Django thing going, but I don't know. And then, of course, we fell in love with him immediately. But again, in order to do that, you have to bring us compelling character. And what's funny is they keep wanting to go back to that Luke, Leia, and Han well, or they want to keep, oh, this is Lando's child, or stuff like that, where it's like, look, you've got a lot of really cool side characters. You got Cad Bane. Why aren't you featuring him?
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, I'll take
But
my Tenormin or whatever blood pressure medication I have to take here.
but I mean, it's not really about what we think, though. Of course, it's you guys. It's always
Never
about what you
is.
guys think. So, do you guys want to see a Cad Bane series, or is there another character that you want to see have their own series? Definitely let us know in the comments, and we'll definitely get a chance to chat about that. And
Yeah, maybe I'll put a
who
poll
knows?
up on YouTube. Maybe I'll put a YouTube poll up. Like, do you want to see a Cad Bane series or not?
There you go.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for tonight. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. I'm sure that I enjoyed chatting with you guys. I mean, I don't know yet, but I'm going to make that assumption that I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Don't make a liar out of me. Friday, though, we're going to do something really special. We're going to do something cool.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one where we're talking about should Star Wars be rebooted, right?
Yes, I'm sure David's going to have lots to say about this one. I'm sure Hi, aka Dom, might have some words. Dragonfly, looking forward to hearing from you. Ronaldo,
Yeah.
you
I
as
mean,
well.
our usual, Ted
Band of
Adam
Mary,
Green.
Ted Adam Green,
Yeah, our usual cast of
Dragonfly, Dwight.
characters.
Come on in, man. We need to
Yeah,
talk
maybe
about this.
Voyager can join us again. Maybe Boatwright Comics can join us again. It's funny that we got all of our viewers. Like we know a lot of these guys.
These are our people, man.
They are. Well, it's the people that we talk to on a regular basis. And, hopefully if you guys are either new subscribers, because we have gotten quite a few, or you're somebody maybe that's watching this and you're being introduced to the show for the first time, you'll join our community, because usually we're live. I mean, there might come a time, I don't know, maybe we'll play around with it a little bit. Maybe we do like Mondays pre-recorded, Fridays live. I don't know. We're always experimenting. And look, in order to make this channel more what you guys want, you guys have to let us know what you want. So let us know in the comments section. Maybe I'll pin something in the community section, like ideas or something. You could certainly join our Discord, where we have conversations running all the time. And we do have special rooms in there that, hey, let us know what you guys are actually thinking. What do you guys want to see? Is there a direction you'd like to see us go in? Is there particular content you'd like us to feature? We're here for you guys, so let us know. And you can start by letting us know in the comments section, and you can also hit the like button on this video and then subscribe to the channel if you're new and you're seeing this for the first time. Maybe this is the first video that you're seeing from us. Hit the subscribe button. Join the community. We generally know a lot of our people by name now, so it's pretty fun. So yeah, Friday's show should actually be a lot of fun, because it's a controversial topic too, actually. There's a lot of people that have strong feelings one way or the other. So I'm looking forward to a very lively discussion on Friday. So hopefully you guys are there to join us, because the more people that join in this one, I think the more fun it's going to be. So we'll see you guys Friday night at 8 o'clock, or no, 11 o'clock. Got to get used to that. Friday night, 11 o'clock. After you guys are done hanging out on Friday, doing whatever you're doing, you're coming back in, you're going to settle. Maybe you're recovering from a night of partying. Fire up YouTube and join our discussion. So we'll see you guys at 11. With that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.